August 20th, 1945. A mere 5 days after Japan's World War II surrender, a man named Ozu Kinosuke, leader of the Tokyo-based Kanto Ozugumi YAKUZA syndicate, launches Tokyo's very first post-war black market, setting up shop at the east exit of Shinjuku Station. Its name, Shinjuku Market. More commonly known back then as the Ozu Market, it was an instant hit. Frankly, it was the perfect time to open the very first Yami-ichi, as the Japanese like to call it. The nation was in ruins, its people morally defeated, mentally drained, and above all, starving. Rations were small, wages had collapsed, and legal food sources were hard to come by. And so, for countless desperate Tokyo residents, the Ozu Market, while illegal and undoubtedly profit-driven, was a lifeline, a place that offered daily necessities at prices that the legal system simply couldn't compete with. But of course, success breeds competition, and as the Ozugumi's black market at Shinjuku Station thrived, other such markets sprang up like mushrooms. First around Shinjuku, then across the entire city of Tokyo, as black markets soon started to appear in one district after another. Ueno, Ginza, Ebisu, Shinbashi, and, you guessed it, Shibuya. Today, Tokyo's Shibuya ward is a fast-paced epicenter of fashion, commerce, and youth culture. But rewind the clock around 80 years and it wasn't that at all. Because back then, Shibuya was modest, nothing like the neon jungle we know today. Still, it had one key asset, a busy train station, and where there are crowds, there's business to be found. Especially the kind that skirts the law. You see, running one of these post-war black markets was kinda risky. Not only did it put you in direct competition with businesses that were mostly run by Yakuza gangs, but you would also have to dodge the watchful eyes of the police at the same time. Or at least, you were supposed to be. So, what happens when you manage to piss off both sides? Well, that is exactly what happened in the summer of 1946, when Shibuya of all places became the stage for a war after the war. The Shibuya Incident. The infamous Shibuya Incident of July of 1946 was a chaotic, all-out conflict unlike anything the Japanese underworld or the police had ever seen. On one side, over 100 Taiwanese black market merchants. On the other, an equally large force of Yakuza fighting side by side with the local police force. Yeah, you heard that right. But how did Japan's criminal underworld and its law enforcement end up fighting together? What exactly happened during the Shibuya incident, and what kind of impact did it have? If those are the questions on your mind right now, then congratulations, my friends. You just clicked on the right video. Because this is the full story behind the 1946 Shibuya Incident. The roots of what would eventually grow into the Shibuya Incident can be traced back to an old and persistent problem in the land of the rising sun. The strained relationship between native Japanese and foreign residents living within the country. And in this case, the issue was a set of violent incidents and growing tensions between Japanese locals and ethnically Chinese and Taiwanese communities in Tokyo. Tensions that would slowly but surely spiral out of control shortly after the war. It all began in late 1945 when the overseas Chinese headquarters established itself in Udagawa-cho, a neighborhood within Shibuya, right at the heart of Tokyo's post-war black market scene near the area's incredibly busy train station. And naturally, some of the Chinese and Taiwanese residents of the city wanted in on the booming underground economy. And so they joined the fray, opening restaurants and stalls on the black market near Shibuya Station, selling everything from food and clothing to rubber goods. Much of what they sold was either controlled or outright prohibited. But of course, this was a black market, and they weren't doing anything that other black market dealers weren't already doing themselves. But there was one thing in particular that separated the Chinese and Taiwanese merchants from their Japanese counterparts: a lack of connections to the right people. While Japanese black marketeers, especially those affiliated with the YAKUZA, could often rely on well-placed connections to avoid trouble, the Chinese and Taiwanese merchants didn't enjoy those same privileges. Take the aforementioned Ozu Kinosuke, for example. As a pioneer of Tokyo's black market, Ozu had cozy ties with the chief of Shinjuku police station. Ties that, at least for a while, allowed him to operate his business mostly unhindered. The foreign merchants, on the other hand, they weren't so lucky, and it didn't take long for trouble to come knocking at their door. Not long after Chinese and Taiwanese-owned stalls started to pop up all over Shibuya, Tsuchida Seichi, the chief of the Shibuya police station, ordered a crackdown, instructing his officers to seize their illegal goods and destroy their market stalls. But instead of resolving the issue, this would only pour gasoline into a fire that would just keep on growing and growing over the months that followed. You see, the Chinese and Taiwanese merchants, they were resilient. As the crackdowns continued, they just kept rebuilding what was torn down, restocked what was confiscated, and as tensions grew, so did their defiance. One day, some of them decided to storm the Shibuya police station in protest, while officers that entered their turf often became victims of violent attacks. By early 1946, the feud between the Chinese and the Taiwanese black marketeers and the police was officially on. But soon, they would have to deal with yet another powerful foe: the YAKUZA. It was on June 11th, 1946, that a group of Taiwanese vendors sought to set up their own market stalls on the highly profitable black market at Tokyo's Shinbashi station. But in order to do that, they would first need permission from the gang that controlled that area, the Matsuda-gumi. It was pretty bad timing to ask for such a favor. Just a day prior, the gang's boss Matsuda-gumi had been gunned down by one of his subordinates, leaving leadership in the hands of his not-to-be-underestimated widow, Yoshiko, who swiftly declined the Taiwanese merchant's request. Safe to say, the Taiwanese did not appreciate being denied the chance to enter the profitable Shinbashi market, and what followed was a fierce conflict between the foreign merchants and the Matsuda-gumi. 5 days later, on June 16th, the Matsuda-gumi's offices were attacked by a group of Chinese residents, an assault that left one person dead and another one seriously wounded. Retaliation then followed exactly a month later, on July 16th, when a crew of Matsuda-gumi members stormed a foreign-owned coffee shop in Shibuya. The fight that broke out ended up injuring 6 Taiwanese residents and 2 police officers who responded to the scene. At this point, it was clear that the situation had officially gone from bad to worse. And then a piece of intel reached the Shibuya police station that ended up pushing everything over the edge. Shortly after the coffee shop assault, the station was informed that allegedly a total of 300 foreigners were planning to stage large-scale retaliatory attacks on the 18th and the 19th of July. Their targets: the Matsuda-gumi offices and the Shibuya police station. This information was simply impossible to ignore. If the rumors of such an attack were true, the clock was ticking. And so for the next 2 days, Shibuya Police Chief Tsuchida Seichi reacted with force. On July 17th, backed by reinforcements from other nearby precincts, he dispatched around 200 officers to crack down on the Udagawa-cho black market once more. 20 arrests were made that day, at the cost of 8 injured officers and 2 wounded Chinese residents. The very next day, on July 18th, pressure only intensified. Yet another 280 police officers swept through the market, making 18 additional arrests. But that same afternoon, the other side retaliated when 3 detectives on patrol were assaulted by a group of Chinese residents outside Shibuya Station. But as July 18th came and went, Chief Tsuchida was convinced that if the rumors of large-scale retaliation were true, it would have to happen the following day, on July 19th. And so, in a bold and obviously rather controversial move, he turned to the underworld for help, striking an alliance with none other than the YAKUZA. At 10 AM on July 19th, a detective referred to in sources simply as Watanabe was sent to establish contact with a certain individual by the name of Takahashi Iwataro. Takahashi was the leader of the Ochiai Ika, a gambling-focused Yakuza syndicate based in Shibuya's Ebisu district. Chief Tsuchida wanted their manpower on his side in the case of an attack on Shibuya police station, and after learning that the chief himself was on board with the whole thing, the gang's leader immediately agreed to lend his assistance. Meanwhile, Tsuchida personally secured backup from 2 other crime figures. Takeda Ichiro, head of yet another Shibuya-based Yakuza outfit, the Takeda-gumi, and Mannen Toichi, an ex-army officer turned right-wing activist, gang boss, and later chairman of All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling. Finally, with several alliances between the Shibuya police and the Yakuza forged, preparations began. At around 2 PM, Takashi Iwataro gathered around 70 of his Ochiai Ika men at his office. The group was then organized into 3 different divisions. A main combat unit consisting of 40 men, a reserve squad of 20 men, and a transport and first aid team of 10 men. Takahashi himself would lead the group as commander-in-chief. By 6:20 PM, the Ochiai Ika had arrived at Shibuya police station, where they joined forces with the Takeda-gumi and the Mannen faction. Altogether, they formed a combined, rather formidable force of around 120 to 130 Yakuza soldiers. Their plan was simple: hold the street outside the police station with their forces positioned to the left of the station facing the road, wait for an attack, then strike. Meanwhile, the Shibuya police station, with the help of nearby precincts, had mobilized around 400 officers, some stationed in the immediate area, others manning vehicle checkpoints set up between the station and Ebisu to monitor any suspicious movement. While all of these preparations were taking place, the Taiwanese merchants of Tokyo were in the middle of a meeting inside a primary school building in Kyobashi, discussing the recent wave of arrests and trying to figure out the best way to respond. Then, once the meeting had wrapped up, the group climbed into a convoy of vehicles and set out for Shimbashi Station, where they intended to confront their old arch-enemy, the Matsuda-gumi. But once they got near the station, they were met by a frickin' aircraft machine gun firing at them from a rooftop. A weapon that, as it turns out, had been dug up in a forest a few days prior by an affiliate of the Matsuda-gumi. And so, faced with overwhelming firepower, the Taiwanese retreated and decided to regroup at the Taiwanese Residents' Union in Asabu to plan their next course of action. Some of them chose to call it a day, but a large group, over 100 of them, decided to head towards Udagawa-cho, and on their way there, they would pass by what else but the Shibuya police station, where an army of police officers and Yakuza thugs were already awaiting their arrival. Sometime after 8 PM, Shibuya police station receives information that a convoy of roughly 120 to 130 Taiwanese residents was en route. They were traveling in 1 jeep, 1 passenger car, and 5 trucks. Then, at around 9 PM, the convoy reached the street in front of Shibuya police station, and what happened next remains somewhat unclear even to this day. According to most accounts, the first 2 trucks of the convoy passed the police station without a sign of violence. But when the 3rd truck passed the station, a shot suddenly rang out. Now, some say that the first shot came from the truck. Other sources claim that a police officer was the first to fire his gun, a warning shot towards the sky that might have been misinterpreted as an attack. But either way, chaos ensued immediately. 3 bullets coming from the Taiwanese side struck 2 police officers. One of them was hit in the lower back, while Patrol Chief Haga Benso was hit in the chest. Gunfire then erupted from all sides, as the Ochiaika and the Manen faction opened fire on the final 2 trucks in the convoy. 1 bullet hit the driver of the 5th and final truck, killing him instantly and causing the vehicle to crash into a building across the street from the station, before tipping over and catching fire. As the Taiwanese rushed to help the crash victims, the Yakuza just kept assaulting them as brawls and gunfights continued along the streets. The police had blocked off all escape routes, and with hundreds of officers flooding in, the Taiwanese found themselves completely surrounded. Still, most of them eventually managed to flee the scene anyway, but several Taiwanese were captured by members of the Yakuza, who then handed them over to the police. In total, 28 Taiwanese were arrested that night. And just like that, the Shibuya incident was over, but the toll it left behind was pretty staggering. An investigation later revealed that about half the officers involved were armed, and that 90 of them had fired their weapons. In total, 245 live rounds were discharged that night, and 8 people were killed. One of these fatalities occurred among the police's own ranks. Patrol Chief Haga Benso, who was hit in the chest and died en route to the hospital. But the remaining 7 deaths all came on the Taiwanese side, 2 of whom passed away on the same day, and beyond that, 34 others were injured, some of them seriously. As for the Yakuza, not a single death was reported among their ranks. Once the arrests had been made, Chief Tsuchida ordered one of his officers to pass on a message to Takahashi Iwataro, basically telling him to get the hell out of there immediately, because the American occupation's military police was already on its way. And so Takahashi and his men retreated back to their office near Ebisu Station without hesitation, and Manen Toichi and his group followed suit, burying the swords they'd used during the fight in the grounds of the nearby Hikawa Shrine before then heading back to Manen's residence. In the eyes of the Shibuya police, their unexpected collaboration with the Yakuza was a huge success. The very next day, 2 officers were sent to Ebisu to personally thank Takahashi Iwataro and the Ochiaika for their support. And on July 22nd, the gang's boss even attended the funeral of Patrol Chief Haga Benso. But despite the chaos and the violence of the Shibuya incident, press coverage in Japan was actually rather limited, at least considering the sheer magnitude of the incident. You see, at the time, the Japanese press was under strict control and censorship of the American occupation. Reports about what happened on July 19th didn't even begin to surface until July 21st, 2 whole days after the actual event. But while Japan's newspapers offered somewhat limited coverage, the case and especially the trial that followed struck a chord with the population of another country, the Chinese. The military trial for the Shibuya incident began on September 30th, 1946. A total of 41 ethnically Taiwanese residents of Japan stood trial, a few of whom had no direct connection to the events of July 19th. And alongside them, 3 Japanese police officers were also charged, including none other than Chief Tsuchida himself. As for the panel of judges, it actually included 1 Chinese official, but only because the Chinese government had demanded it after hearing about what happened. After all, tensions between China and Japan were still incredibly raw in the immediate aftermath of World War II, and there was a growing concern, especially in the Chinese press, over the treatment of the Taiwanese detainees. You see, there was kind of a murky legal issue at play here. Most Taiwanese living in Japan at the time had previously been classified as subjects of the Japanese Empire. But now, with Japan's colonies stripped away, their status was in limbo. And yet, here they were, thrown into Japanese jails and interrogated by Japanese police officers without any form of legal counsel. It just didn't sit right. Not in China. And generally, the way that the Americans were handling the occupation of Japan was put into question, and rightfully so. I mean, how could a full-on street war erupt in Tokyo under their watch, without their knowledge? And perhaps even more damning, how could the Japanese police just get away with collaborating with the YAKUZA during the incident? Well, there was actually one moment during the trial when the whole YAKUZA thing was nearly unraveled. A judge asked how one of the Taiwanese victims had died from a stab wound, especially since Chief Tsuchida had previously stated that none of his officers were carrying bladed weapons that night. Tsuchida knew that the truth could be devastating, and so he called in a favor with his Yakuza buddy Takashi Iwataro, who agreed to take the fall if necessary. The plan, if it ever came up again, Takashi would simply testify that he had stabbed the merchant, but that the murder had absolutely nothing to do with the Shibuya Incident. However, it actually never came to that, because instead, Chief Tsuchida boldly claimed in court that he and his officers had only been acting under orders from the American occupation, and that their actions were therefore also the responsibility of the Americans. The murder was not pursued any further. Finally, on December 10th, 1946, the court issued its verdict. 3 Taiwanese defendants were sentenced to hard labor, while 35 others were deported, some of whom reportedly chose deportation over imprisonment. No police officers or Yakuza members were ever charged with anything. Got something to say about this wild piece of post-war chaos? Then head to the comments and let me know what you think about this unexpected alliance between cops and criminals. And as always, I've got a couple of shoutouts to make to the incredible folks supporting me over on Patreon, including Bobby Wu, Ronan, The Hockey Gentleman, Javier Sorevia, Capybara Chuck, Turam, Daniel Dees, RK0, Sierra DC, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Steve Matsui, Cats and Soup, Charred B-Man, Ben Harradine, Metal Mama, T-Bird, and Tom Ericus Prime. And to everyone who is still here at this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.